understand what happened in that house before I tell you what I did about it. I spent 38 years being the kind of woman who disappears into her own life. Quietly, completely, without complaint. My name is June. June Adler. And I was 64 years old when my daughter told me I had 30 days to find somewhere else to live. 30 days. In the house I've lived in since 1987. I want to be careful here because I know how these things sound from the outside. People hear mother-daughter conflict, and they imagine two stubborn women fighting over petty things, who called whom last, who forgot whose birthday. That wasn't this. What happened to me was something I still have trouble naming out loud. Not because it was unspeakable, but because even now, 3 years later, part of me can't believe my own child looked me in the eye and said what she said. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start where it actually started. My husband Gerald passed in March of 2019. Pancreatic cancer. 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. He was 67 years old, and he was the kind of man who fixed things without being asked. Leaky faucets, cracked porch steps, the screen door that never hung right. After he was gone, the house got very loud in its silence. Every creak, every draft. I'd lived there so long, I knew every sound it made. And suddenly every sound it made, and suddenly every sound reminded me of him. My daughter Renee. She was 36 at the time. Called me 2 weeks after the funeral and said she and her husband Clifton were worried about me. She said a woman my age, alone in a 4-bedroom house, that was a lot to manage. She said they'd been talking and they thought the best thing, the most sensible thing would be for them to move in. They'd help with the mortgage. They'd keep me company. It would be good for everybody. I said yes. Because she was my daughter and I missed her and I was grieving and the house was too quiet and I genuinely believed that this was my child wanting to be close to her mother in a hard time. I understand now that I saw what I needed to see. The first year wasn't bad. Renee cooked dinner some nights. Clifton shoveled the driveway that winter without me asking. I started sleeping better. I thought we were building something. Then, somewhere around month 14, things began to shift in ways I couldn't quite name at first. Small things. The way Clifton started referring to our house in conversation, not pointedly, just casually, the way you do when a place has become yours in your mind. The way Renee rearranged the kitchen without mentioning it, and when I moved things back to where they'd been for 30 years, they moved them again. The guest room where I'd kept Gerald's things, his fishing rods, his toolbox, the 3 boxes of books he never finished. One day I walked past and the door was open and his things were gone and it had been turned into a home office for Clifton. I asked Renee about it. She said, "Mom, you can't leave that stuff in there forever. It's not healthy." I let it go. I told myself she was trying to help. By the time Renee got pregnant with their first child, which was spring of 2021, I had already learned to move through that house carefully, quietly, like a guest who stayed too long and knows it. The pregnancy made things worse faster than I expected. Renee started talking about the baby's room, about space, about how a baby needed stability and a consistent home environment. I agree with all of it. Of course I agreed. I was excited to be a grandmother. But then one evening in July, Renee and Clifton sat me down at the kitchen table. The table Gerald and I had bought at an estate sale in 1994. I remembered that detail for no logical reason except that it was mine. And they told me they'd been thinking. They said the house was going to feel crowded with the baby. They said I'd probably be happier somewhere smaller, somewhere designed for my needs. Clifton mentioned a 55-plus community in Roswell he'd driven past. He had printed out information. He slid it across the table to me. Renee said, "We just think this would be better for everyone, Mom, including you." I sat there looking at that paper and I thought, this is my house. Gerald and I bought this house. We painted every room ourselves. I planted the azaleas out front. I know where the circuit breaker is and which burner runs hot and where the roof leaks if it rains sideways. This is my house. I said, I need some time to think. Renee said, of course. Take 30 days. 30 days. She said it so easily, like it was reasonable. Like 30 days was a generous offer. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bedroom Gerald and I had shared for 3 decades, and I stared at the ceiling and I ran through it all. Every kindness I'd shown, every silence I'd kept, every room I'd stopped going into because I didn't want to intrude. And I thought about what 30 days meant. Where would I go? I had my Social Security, $1,340 a month. I had a small amount in savings, maybe $18,000, money I'd been careful with since Gerald died. I had nowhere near enough for a down payment on anything. The 55-plus community Clifton had printed out was $1,800 a month for a one-bedroom unit. I did the math in my head in the dark at 2 in the morning, and I understood for the first time in my adult life what it meant to have no options. Or so I thought. The next morning, I drove to the pharmacy, then I drove home, and then I did something I hadn't done in over a year. I went into Gerald's office, the small room off the hallway that Renee and Clifton hadn't touched because it still had his name on a little wooden sign I'd made him as a joke 20 years ago. I sat down in his chair. I don't know what I was looking for. Comfort, maybe. Presence. I started going through his desk, not looking for anything specific, just touching things. His reading glasses with the scratched left lens, a coffee mug from a conference in Nashville in 2003, rubber bands, paper clips, a half-finished crossword puzzle. In the bottom left drawer, under a folder of old car insurance documents, there was a white envelope with my name on it. June, in Gerald's handwriting. Not a legal document. Not typed. Just his handwriting, which I hadn't seen in 2 years, and my name. I sat there for a long time before I opened it. The letter inside was dated October 2018, 5 months before his diagnosis. Gerald had written it by hand, 3 pages on yellow legal paper. He wrote about our life together. He wrote about things I'd forgotten. A weekend in Savannah when we were first married, the way I'd laughed at something he said on the drive home. A joke I couldn't even remember now. He wrote about the things he was afraid of. He wrote that he knew his health wasn't good and he wanted me to be protected. And then he described what he had done. Gerald had been careful with money his entire life in ways I hadn't fully understood. He'd worked as a structural engineer for 31 years, and in the late 1990s, he had invested in a small commercial property with 2 of his colleagues, a strip mall outside of Marietta, Georgia. Over the years, the other 2 partners had bought out their shares. By 2015, Gerald owned 60% of the property outright. He'd put it in both our names in 2016 without ever making a big announcement about it. Just quietly added my name to the deed. He wrote that he hadn't wanted to worry me with the details while things were uncertain. He wrote that if I was reading this letter, I should call a man named Robert Fitch at Fitch & Associates in Buckhead. There was a phone number. I put the letter down on the desk and I pressed my hand flat against it like I needed to feel that it was real. I didn't tell Renee. Not that day. Not for several weeks. I called Robert Fitch the next morning from my car, parked in the lot of a Kroger 3 miles from the house. He knew exactly who I was. Gerald had been in contact with him regularly, apparently. The property, a 12-unit strip mall, mostly occupied, generating consistent rental income, was worth substantially more than I had imagined. After the accounting of everything, including Gerald's life insurance policy that I'd only partially understood the value of, I was looking at a financial position I hadn't known I had. I drove home that day, and I made dinner, and I sat across from Renee and Clifton, and I passed the salad bowl, and I said nothing. I had 28 days left on my 30-day notice. I spent the next 2 weeks meeting with Robert Fitch and a real estate attorney he referred me to. A woman named Denise, who had a small office in Decatur and who spoke slowly and clearly and never once made me feel like I was out of my depth. Denise explained my options. She explained what Gerald's deed of gift had done, legally. She explained the property's income history. At the end of the second week, Denise asked me what I wanted to do. I thought about that question for 3 days. What I did not want was war. I want to be clear about that because the easiest story to tell here is the revenge story, the wronged mother who comes back and burns everything down. That wasn't what I was after. Renee was my daughter. She was pregnant with my first grandchild. I had loved her for 36 years with every part of myself, including the parts she'd bruised. I didn't want to destroy her. I wanted her to understand something she clearly hadn't understood yet. I started apartment hunting on day 23 of my 30 days. I found a 2-bedroom unit in a mid-rise building in Sandy Springs, newer construction, doorman building, 4th floor, big windows looking out over a courtyard with trees. It was the kind of place I would never have looked at before, because I never thought of myself as someone who lived in that kind of place. 1,200 square feet, in-unit washer-dryer, a balcony. I signed the lease on day 27. I did not tell Renee where I was moving. On day 29, I packed my things into a rented cargo van. My sister Wileen came down from Knoxville to help me, bless her, and I moved out of the house I had lived in for 38 years, while Renee and Clifton were at a prenatal appointment. I left my key on the kitchen counter. I took the salad bowl. I left Renee a voicemail that said, "I've moved. I'm fine. I'll be in touch when I'm settled." I did not hear back from her for 11 days. When she did call, she said she was hurt that I'd left without saying goodbye properly. She said she felt like I was being dramatic. She said she hoped I understood that everything they'd done had been for my benefit. I said, "I know you believe that." She asked for my new address. I said I wasn't ready to share it yet. She said, "Mom, don't be like this." I said, "I love you. I'll talk to you soon." And I hung up. What came next happened slowly, over about 4 months. Gerald's property income started hitting the account Denise had helped me set up. I furnished the apartment with things I actually liked, not Gerald's things, not the furniture Renee had gradually rearranged into her own preferences, but things that were mine. A deep blue sofa, a reading chair by the window, a kitchen table that seated 4, not 8, because I didn't need 8 anymore. I started walking in the mornings. I found a coffee shop 3 blocks from the building where the woman at the counter learned my order by the 3rd week and had it ready when she saw me come through the door. I started sleeping through the night. I started slowly, and then all at once, feeling like myself again. Not the self who had moved through her own house like a guest, but the self who had known how to take up space. Renee texted occasionally, short messages, "How are you? Hope you're doing okay." I replied the same way, "Fine, well, doing well." Her son was born in November of 2021. She texted me a photo. He was beautiful, absolutely beautiful. I cried in my reading chair with my phone in both hands, looking at this tiny face, Gerald's nose on a brand new person. I went to visit them when he was 2 weeks old. I brought food, a full spread from a restaurant Renee had loved since high school, her actual favorites, not what I thought she should want. I held the baby for 2 hours. We didn't talk about any of it. We just existed in the same room, careful with each other, which was at least better than what we'd had before. That was the beginning of something. Small, cautious, but real. About 8 months later, this past spring, my building management told me there was a vacancy on the 7th floor, a larger unit, newly renovated, corner apartment with views in 2 directions. The rent was higher, but given where my finances stood, it was manageable. I took it. I moved up 3 floors. I didn't post about it anywhere because I'm 64 and I'm not on Instagram, but I did send Wileen some photos, and Wileen, who has never once in her life kept a secret, apparently mentioned it to her own daughter, who mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to Renee. Renee called me on a Tuesday afternoon. She said, "I heard you moved into a bigger place." I said, "I did. 7th floor. Nice views." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How are you affording that, Mom? Are you okay financially? Do you need help?" I said, "I'm fine, sweetheart. I'm more than fine." There was another pause. Then she said, "I've been thinking a lot. Clifton and I both have. We've been talking about how hard things have been between us, and we thought, since you have more space now, maybe we could spend more time with you. Maybe we could even talk about some kind of arrangement where we stayed with you more regularly. It would be good for the baby to have you close." I held the phone away from my face for a moment, and I just breathed. There it was. The version of this conversation I had run through in my head at 2 in the morning more times than I could count, except now I was sitting in a corner apartment on the 7th floor with Gerald's property income in my account, an attorney's number in my phone, and a reading chair I'd chosen myself, by a window I'd chosen myself, in a building I'd chosen for myself. And the ask hadn't changed at all. The reasoning had just been repackaged. More time with you, good for the baby. Not, we were wrong. Not, we are sorry for what we did. Not, we understand now what we took from you. Just, we heard you have more space, and we'd like some of it. I said, "I'd love for you to visit." "You're always welcome to visit," she said. "I mean something more regular. Something more like, I don't know, living closer?" I said, "Renee, I need you to hear me very clearly. I love you. I love your son more than I have words for. But I'm not in a position to offer living arrangements. My home is my home. It's the first space I've had that is entirely mine in a very long time, and that matters to me." She said, "Mom," I said, "I'm not punishing you. I want to be really clear about that. I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm telling you what I need." She was crying a little by then. I could hear it. She said, "Do you know how hard these past 2 years have been? We've had a baby. Clifton lost his job for 4 months. We've been struggling." I said, "I know, and I'm sorry that it's been hard. But Renee, I need you to remember I was struggling too. I was 63 years old and I had 30 days. The silence after that was very long. Finally, she said, "I know we didn't handle that right." That was the first time. The first time she had said anything close to that. I said, "Thank you for saying that." We talked for another hour, about the baby, mostly, about a visit that coming weekend, about a dinner I'd make, her grandmother's recipe for pot roast, the one she'd asked me for every winter since she was 12, about small things, about the ordinary infrastructure of being family to each other. Before we hung up, she asked again if there was any way to make things more official, her word, about time together, about arrangements. I said, "Let's have dinner first. Let's take it one step at a time." She said okay, and that was enough for now. I've been thinking about what I would tell a woman in the position I was in, the woman I was at 2 in the morning doing impossible maths on a fixed income with 30 days on a clock. I would tell her this. The thing that saved me was something my husband did quietly, without fanfare, without asking for credit. He just made sure I was protected. And I think about how different everything would have looked if that envelope hadn't been in that drawer. I think about all the women who don't have an envelope, who don't have a Gerald, who have the same 30 days with no Robert Fitch at the end of them. That's what keeps me up now, honestly. Not anger at Renee, not bitterness. Just the understanding of how thin the margin was. How easily I could have ended up in that one-bedroom unit in Roswell with $1,800 a month leaving my account before I even bought groceries. I walk every morning. I sit in my reading chair. I hold my grandson on weekends, and I feed him, and I learn the specific sound of his laugh, which is already at less than 2 years old, the most purely joyful thing I have ever heard in my life. The house in the suburbs, the one I lived in for 38 years, sold last November. Renee and Clifton moved to a place of their own in Smyrna. She sent me photos of the nursery. I told her it was beautiful, and I meant it. Gerald's property is still there, just off the highway outside Marietta. I drove past it once just to see it. A strip mall, unremarkable from the outside. A nail salon, a tax preparation office, a cell phone repair shop, a dry cleaner. The parking lot was about half full on a Wednesday afternoon. I sat in the parking lot for a few minutes, just looking at it. Then I drove home.